So on today's show, we're going to be looking ahead to what is going to be the parliamentary sitting as the House of Commons returns. That's right, we're talking politics. And if your brain just tuned out in self-defense, I'm so sorry. But I hope you stick with us because we're going to be trying to do something in this episode. We're going to be trying to make sense of what's going on Parliament Hill and maybe see how some of this could impact you in the year to come. Now, the thing about politics is there's always a lot going on, and it's kind of hard to keep up. But luckily for us, we've got our colleagues at the Parliamentary Bureau who keep a close eye on these sorts of things so we don't have to.
Hi, I'm Chris Rands. Over my shoulder is the south door of the West Block. The House of Commons is right upstairs. This is the busiest place in Canadian politics. Everyone comes through here, including all 338 MPs. Now, what I'm looking for in this season's politics is MPs you haven't seen as much or at all on TV. People who explain the same position as their leader, but maybe a little more fulsome, maybe in a different voice, maybe with different experiences. All it takes is a quick question from me and a desire from them to get on TV.
Hi, I'm Catherine Cullen.
Hi, my name is David Thurton.
Hi there, I'm Marina von Stackelberg.
I'm Olivia Stefanovic.
I'm Janice McGregor.
I'm Karina Roman.
Hey, I'm Rafi Boudjikanian.
Hey, I'm Ashley Burke.
Hi, I'm Catherine Tunney.
Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, and when it comes to politics, here's what I'm watching for when the House of Commons returns.
What I'm going to be watching for when the House of Commons returns is the government moving ahead with its so-called just transition legislation.
How the Canadian government is going to deal with this country's supply of drugs and vaccines.
What I'm watching for when the House of Commons comes back will be the budget.
And when it comes to the Conservative Party, what I am going to be watching for when the House of Commons comes back is the message from leader Pierre Poilievre.
One of the things I'll be watching for closely over the next few months is whether the federal government will finally start rolling out reparations for First Nations children.
When it comes to the national security beat, one of the things that I'll be looking to when the House of Commons returns is, of course, the Emergencies Act report.
I keep an eye on international trade issues here in the Parliamentary Bureau.
Immigration is one of the files I'll be keeping a close eye on when the House of Commons resumes sitting.
And when it comes to Hockey Canada, what I'll be watching for when Parliament resumes is whether or not the federal government agrees to launch a larger public inquiry into abuse in sports.
Okay, so that is a wide range of topics, and we're going to be trying to break those down for you. And to do that, we have the CBC's Aaron Wary with us. He's a senior writer with the Parliamentary Bureau. Hey, Aaron, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah, so let's get started with the government, and let's talk about some of their priorities for this year ahead.
What I'm watching for when the House of Commons comes back will be the budget. It won't be the first thing on the agenda, but when it comes, likely in March, it will be an interesting one. Will there be new measures to help Canadians with the cost of living and inflation? Is there proof that the existing measures already in place have had any impact or made a difference? Will there be a health care deal with the provinces in time to be reflected in the budget? And if so, will the amount set aside for that deal be enough to satisfy the NDP and its agreement with the Liberals to support the Liberal government? I'm also bracing myself for some kind of last-minute twist in the budget story, another domestic or global crisis that once again forces the government to scramble to adjust the budget. And will the long-predicted recession come true?
For a long time, Canada's trade policy was very focused on diversification, trying to be less reliant on trade with the U.S. for our economic prosperity. Then along came the pandemic, issues with global supply chains, concerns about increased aggression in Chinese foreign policy and human rights abuses there, also Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And in the face of all that, and combined with the rise of populist political movements, liberalizing global trade became a lot less fashionable. Even Western democracies with long histories of free capitalism started doing things that were a lot more protectionist. We started to see, for example, the heavy subsidization of key industries to protect them from foreign competition. And this could be a problem for Canada. Our pockets here not as deep as those of the U.S. Treasury, and we will see in Chrystia Freeland's upcoming spring budget the extent to which she can really afford to keep up with that subsidy game. Canada likes to think of itself as a very kind of independent middle power, and people who specialize in economics will tell you that the best way to keep costs down is to have very kind of free trade systems. And in a time of inflation, how much things cost really matters. But the competing pressure to line up your business deals with your political values and your political goals is going to be really strong in 2023.
So what is just transition legislation? Well, it's supposed to be the government's plan to help oil and gas workers as we move our economies from burning a lot of fossil fuels to burning less fossil fuels. So we are expecting the government to move ahead not just with legislation, but also with its action plan. And I'm also hearing from a number of people that there could be a pretty substantial funding commitment attached to their plan to help oil and gas energy workers in this country. And this piece of legislation is important because it's also part of the deal that the Liberals have with the NDP. That deal states that the government needs to move ahead with this legislation. They also face pressure from climate activists and the Alberta government, who has said that they're concerned about this legislation. They're concerned that the federal government wants to phase out the fossil fuel sector through this legislation. The Liberals say that's not what this is about. This is about what they call a sustainable jobs agenda.
Okay, so Aaron, that's a lot going on there, but maybe we can drill down on some of the specifics. Looking first to the ruling Liberals, what does 2023 look like for them?
I think it looks, in a word, challenging. First and foremost, we're all kind of at this point expecting an economic slowdown as higher interest rates sort of take their impact and the global economy slows down. Now, that's supposed to be a good thing, of course, to a certain extent, because it's supposed to sort of dampen inflation. But anytime there's an economic slowdown, it's going to be a hard sort of year for the incumbent government, because it's the incumbent government that has to answer for that. The other piece of that is, though, that the government, whatever the economy is doing, the government has a huge to-do list, not least the kind of economic agenda they want to build out for themselves. The Prime Minister's very big right now on the idea of Canada being sort of the globe's most reliable supplier of clean tech and clean energy in a net zero world. And they really need to use this year to kind of build out that agenda and really build a foundation under it.
Interestingly, another big challenge that they're facing, obviously, is that they have a new leader of the opposition. Pierre Poilievre was elected last year in the Conservative Party, and I'm curious sort of what we're imagining the challenges are going to be with him, specifically for the Liberals. What role is that going to play in the year ahead?
Yeah, so Pierre Poilievre, you're going to hear him say it a lot, I suspect, is campaigning on this idea that everything is broken in Canada. And so you can kind of expect him to jump on any evidence to support that thesis. An opposition leader in Parliament has a couple different ways to kind of press that agenda, press his case. One is question period, of course, but the other is committees. The Conservatives are already sort of chomping at the bit to get back to Parliament and launch some committee studies into government contracts and this government's use of private consultants. And I suspect that is going to be a pretty major forum for them going forward. Any time the government is kind of dealing with an economic slowdown, the opposition leader has a lot of room to maneuver, and the government is going to have to be pretty conscious of the fact that anything that seems to kind of support Pierre Poilievre's thesis, he's gonna point to pretty loudly.
Yeah, I think the point that you're talking about there, that when we're experiencing an economic slowdown, that's usually a better time for the opposition. I think that's something key to sort of remember. Okay, so Poilievre he came up a number of times when we were talking to our reporters for the look-aheads. Maybe we can go over a couple of those.
What I am going to be watching for when the House of Commons comes back is the message from leader Pierre Poilievre. Now, last year he was laser focused on the economy, so can he keep that tight, determined focus, or is he going to be pushed off his message either because he becomes interested in other parts of the Liberal agenda, or because circumstances beyond his control push him off of it? For instance, we're expecting the final report from the Emergencies Act inquiry. The Freedom Convoy isn't necessarily a topic that Mr. Poilievre wants to be talking about a lot. Will he be pushed off his message when that is in the headlines? Will also be interesting to see what he does with the message itself. Not just the theme, but what he's talking about. Experts in political communications will tell you that if you want to become Prime Minister, it's not just about criticizing the government. You also have to offer some credible solutions. He's talked a lot about how Canadians are hurting. He wants to turn that hurt into hope. Are we going to see some new ideas for him about how he intends to go about doing that beyond what he's already offered? It's clear he's been driving a lot of the political conversation. So can he stay on the course he has in mind, or is he going to be driven off that path by other events?
Another file I'll be keeping a close eye on is the fallout from the trucker protest convoy that took over downtown Ottawa last year for 3 weeks. In February, we're expecting the report from the Commission of Inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act to quell that protest. The Liberals will be sure to remind Canadians, if the report sides with them, that is, that some in the official opposition, including current Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, were supporters of the convoy. Well, they'll likely try to keep quiet about it should the report find their use of those powers was not justified.
After the main headline of whether the government was justified or not in invoking the Emergencies Act to deal with the convoy protests last winter, I'll be flipping to the recommendations. And that's because, depending on what the commissioner has to say, it could change what our national security agencies do and how they do it. You know, one of the key moments during the inquiry in November was this question of what does it mean to be, a threat to the security of Canada? What does that look like, in 2022 and in 2023? The head of Canada's spy agency, CSIS, has been very open that he thinks that the CSIS Act is outdated and kind of clunky, and he would like to see, some changes to that. Meanwhile, critics say, whoa, CSIS has already incredible powers and that we should keep those powers, narrow and not open the act up too much. So, depending on what the commissioner has to say, the House of Commons could take on that debate, and it's a debate that is bound to be heated.
All right, Aaron, we heard from a number of reporters there talking about the Public Order Emergency Commission, and that was a real circus there last year. And I'm curious how you think that's going to play out, just in terms of the politics of it in this year to come.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say at this point that most people in Canada have kind of made up their mind about what happened there, and most people at this point seem to be generally supportive of what the government did. But the commission is obviously not just a test of public opinion. It's going to look at the details, and it's going to look at that key question of whether they met the legal threshold. So if they don't meet that legal threshold, if the government used the Emergencies Act when it maybe wasn't entirely legally necessary, that sort of complicates the argument the government's going to make. The flip side of that, of course, is that their main opponent, the Conservatives, isn't really well placed to sort of press an argument here. Pierre Poilievre's sort of very enthusiastic support for the convoy has kind of become an uncomfortable thing for him, and it's not clear that he's particularly keen, as my colleague Catherine Cullen said, particularly keen to talk about this. So, if the commission comes back and says they didn't meet that legal threshold, you can see a bit of an argument for Pierre Poilievre. But if the commission comes back and says, yeah, they met the legal threshold, or yeah, they were justified, I suspect Pierre Poilievre will find a way to quickly move on to some other topic.
Yeah. Okay, Aaron, we're going to have to jump to a commercial break here, but when we come back, we're going to get into some of the other key issues in the year ahead. Hey, welcome back. Now, we've been talking about what could be in store as Parliament returns, and there are some big issues on the horizon. So we've got the CBC's Aaron Wary here to talk us through everything. We're going to do a little bit of lightning around here, throw to some clips, get your reactions. Y'all ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, let's get started.
The clock is ticking on the Liberals' promise to bring 40,000 Afghans here after the Taliban took over Afghanistan in August 2021. It's still about 12,000 short of that goal, and the Taliban's tightening grip on power and strife between the regime and neighboring countries like Pakistan, where many Afghans have fled, are all adding to that challenge. Canada's also promising to beef up its overall immigration levels to welcome 500,000 people in 2025, and policy experts are saying that will have to be balanced out with solving existing healthcare and housing issues in the country.
Okay, Aaron, to start things off, thoughts on the government's plan on immigration?
Yeah, if you look at the opinion polling, even going back decades now, Canadians have become more supportive and optimistic about immigration. And that's I think, a really good news story. But the Liberals have set some pretty ambitious targets, and it's not obvious that they are going to be able to pull those off without kind of, hitting some obstacles or difficulties. And so, it's really down to kind of how this gets played out and whether they can, deal with things like the immigration backlog. As much as Canadians are supportive of the issue, there are going to be some obstacles, there are going to be some sort of bumps in the road, and how the Liberals handle that is going to be pretty interesting.
Okay, let's move on to the next topic.
Let's start with medications. Over the last 6 months, there's been some pretty significant shortages of pretty common drugs. Things like cold medications, antibiotics, and notably children's painkillers. We heard from emergency room doctors who said that families were actually showing up in their ER departments because they couldn't find that children's Advil or Tylenol in their pharmacies, and so they didn't know what else to do. Now, this is mainly a supply chain issue, and so Health Canada says it's been working with manufacturers to increase production. It also has temporarily allowed the import of some of these products from foreign countries to try and deal with the supply demand, but this process has been quite slow.
Okay, Aaron, some thoughts on that?
Yeah, the medicine shortages, the other issues that we saw last year, in emergency rooms and crowded hospitals, those really go to the idea that things had kind of gone awry in the health care system and in the country writ large. And the biggest thing the federal government can do here is to make a deal with the provinces and use its funding power to push for changes. And at this point, it looks like the federal government and the provinces are finally headed towards a deal, but the details are going to be pretty key, and sort of the focus on tangible results, I think, is going to be the piece that comes out of this that people kind of really need to pay attention to.
All right, I want to jump to another issue now, one that I think a lot of people are talking about, Hockey Canada.
Now, ever since Hockey Canada came under scrutiny over its handling of sexual assault allegations, MPs of all political stripes and the Minister of Sport have told me that they've received other complaints involving other sports. And it's not just sexual assault. The complaints include mental and physical abuse, players alleging that they are being pushed too hard. I'm also going to be watching to see whether or not the government resumes its funding to Hockey Canada and under what conditions it's currently frozen, and whether or not any of those players, those former World Junior players allegedly involved in that 2018 sexual assault, will they face criminal charges and will they be named?
Okay, so this Hockey Canada story is one of these ones that just keeps on expanding. Where do we think this is going to be going in the next year?
I think those questions for, about an inquiry and further investigation aren't going to go away anytime soon. But I think one of the things you've seen in this story, somewhat apart from obviously the main issues here, is that MPs realized across parties in a multi-partisan effort that they could use the House of Commons' sort of functions and powers to really bring attention to an issue. And I thought that was an interesting takeaway for the MPs. And I think it will be interesting to see whether they not only stay on Hockey Canada and on this issue, but whether they kind of, realize that that's a model to sort of press for other issues that sort of go beyond the sort of to and fro of the usual political forum.
All right, let's get into another issue that Canadians have been talking about.
One of the things I'll be watching for closely over the next few months is whether the federal government will finally start rolling out reparations for First Nations children. This is money that the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ordered Ottawa to pay to First Nations kids and their family members for underfunding the on-reserve child welfare system for years. Now, the government was so close to finalizing a historic deal on this last year. It even made an announcement, allocated $20 billion for compensation and another $20 billion for long-term reform of the on-reserve child welfare system. That's $40 billion in total that we're talking about, and it represents the largest proposed settlement in Canadian history. So the government has a big decision to make. Will it continue to fight this in court, or will it try to renegotiate and possibly add more money to fulfill the needs of all victims?
So obviously reconciliation, a massive issue. Where do we see that going in the next year?
If you talk to people who know the Prime Minister, if you talk to the Prime Minister, reconciliation is one of those issues that he cares about most. And I think, looking forward and looking ahead to an election at some point in the next few years, reconciliation is one of those issues where the government really needs to be able to show progress, show that it made a change from where things were in 2015. And issues like this settlement, like drinking water advisories, these are issues that are going to resonate. And so I suspect there's going to be a fair bit of pressure, not only externally, but internally to kind of deal with some of these outstanding questions and sort of be able to say that the government turned the page, that it has really made significant progress over the last 7 years.
All right, thanks so much, Aaron. We're going to be back for a final thought after this. We'll see you after the break.
Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton, and when it comes to politics, here's what I'm watching for when the House of Commons returns. First, the tone. There's been lots of talk over the past number of weeks as leaders tour parts of the country that their rhetoric is getting hotter, which gets people speculating about an election. So do those attacks sharpen or get more aggressive? Or do we see everyone kind of calm down once they get inside the House of Commons? Secondly, the Liberal-NDP deal. Remember, this is the deal that says the NDP will support the Liberals on supply and confidence matters until 2025, provided the Liberals continue to move forward on some key policy issues like pharmacare and dental care. It seems the deal is holding up pretty well, but are there any signs of fraying at the seams? And thirdly, the leader of the official opposition. He's trying to make himself better known to Canadians and going at the government really hard on the economy and inflation. So does Pierre Poilievre change his approach at all? Does he double down on something that seems to be getting some traction with Canadians? All these questions I've raised lead to the inevitable question, are we getting closer to an election for this minority government? The answer is yes, of course, but how much closer is the part we can't really answer yet.
Welcome back. You just heard Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton there, pretty much summing up everything we've been talking about, what to look for as the House returns. Now, we've been talking with Parliamentary Bureau senior writer Aaron Wary. And Aaron, Rosemary mentioned the question that's hanging over this entire minority parliament since they came into power. So maybe I can ask the question to you. What do you think in this next year? Are we going to have another election? Yay or nay?
Look, predictions aren't worth much, and that said, I'll make one. I don't think there's going to be an election. I may ask you to burn this tape in 6 months if there turns out to be one. But at this point, it's not clear that anybody really has the incentive to go for an election at this point. The Liberals, first of all, may be going through a tough economic time and have an agenda to implement and want to have, I suspect, a record to run on in the next election. And you need time to do that, to implement that agenda. The other piece of this, of course, is the NDP. They have an incentive to keep this deal going for a while because there are pieces of that agenda that they want implemented and that will take time to implement. So at this point, it doesn't look obvious that there's going to be an election, but it's a minority parliament, and the rule of minority parliaments is they can kind of collapse at a moment's notice. But at this point, based on the feeling, I get from the Prime Minister and from people around the government, this sense that there's a lot of unfinished business. That leads me to think this government is at this point looking for time and looking to sort of finish more of its business before it goes to the electorate next.
All right, Aaron, thanks so much for being here. That's it for us. About that, I'm Kieran Oudshoorn. Thanks for watching.